Okay, so, ready to dive into the mind of a legend.
Ooh, sounds fun.
We're talking Geoff Hinton.
The godfather of AI.
Yeah, the godfather of AI.
Big name.
And his thoughts on the future of intelligence, like both the digital kind and our own.
Okay.
You sent us this fascinating talk that he gave at the Vector Institute.
Oh, yeah, this is a good one.
It's packed with insights.
Yeah, I mean, what's so fascinating about this is that, he doesn't shy away from, expressing his hopes and fears about AI.
Yeah.
And he does it with this really interesting blend of deep knowledge, but also humor.
Absolutely. And this is from a YouTube video, so we're really going to dig into not just what he says, but how he says it.
Yeah.
His tone, his little jokes, the way he uses examples. All of those things help us understand, where he's coming from.
Right. It's like we're getting a front row seat to the thought process of, a true pioneer in the field.
Exactly. So let's jump right in.
Okay.
Hinton starts off with the story about how dramatically the perception of AI has shifted over the years. He actually recounts a time when neural networks were practically dismissed as a research area.
Yeah, can you imagine that?
I know.
Now it's all everyone talks about. But back then it was nah.
Yeah, they were just whatever.
Yeah.
He talks about submitting a paper on deep learning to a conference in 2006.
Yeah.
And getting rejected.
Oh my gosh.
Can you imagine?
No.
The conference organizers told him they already accepted one paper on deep learning.
Yeah.
And they felt that was enough.
Too much deep learning for one conference.
Now fast forward to today, and the world is buzzing.
Right.
Sometimes even panicking about AI.
I know. It's incredible how quickly things have changed.
Yeah.
And Hinton, with his self-deprecating humor, he makes even these complex topics approachable.
Yeah.
He's like, hey, we've all been wrong before. This stuff is hard.
I know.
Yeah.
Totally. Okay, so another big idea that Hinton dives into is this difference between digital and analog computation.
Yeah.
Essentially computers versus the human brain. Right.
He points out that digital computation, what our computers use, is energy intensive.
Yes.
But allows for easy knowledge transfer between copies. It's like copying and pasting a file.
Yeah.
But analog computation, in our brains, is incredibly efficient.
Right.
But also mortal.
Yeah.
The knowledge dies with the hardware.
It can't just be downloaded and transferred.
Right. It can't just be downloaded and transferred.
Right.
So this raises a fascinating question.
Yeah.
Could we build analog neural networks?
Ooh.
Hinton actually suggests the possibility of using biological neurons with gene editing.
Whoa.
Imagine tiny brains on chips.
That's wild.
I know.
Like a little tiny brain.
That's what he spent his last 2 years at Google, exploring ways to scale up analog computation. But there are hurdles, of course.
There are always hurdles, right?
Big ones.
Yeah.
He talks about the challenges of maintaining biological neurons.
Yeah. I mean, he even jokes about visiting a lab where the postdoc was more focused on growing a kidney than on their experiment.
Oh, gosh.
As a side project.
Yeah.
They were trying to do an experiment, and the person working on it was like,
oh, that's so funny.
oh, I'm also growing a kidney over here.
It's a very, practical concern, right?
Yeah.
If you're working with biological systems.
Yeah.
There's a whole other layer of complexity.
But then there's also this issue of backpropagation.
Yes.
The process that neural networks use to learn, it's
Right.
much easier to do with digital systems because they have these precise models of their own computations.
Digital's very neat and tidy
Right.
in that way.
Analog systems are inherently messy and variable,
Yeah.
making backpropagation really tough to implement effectively.
And he admits that despite promising results
Right.
on smaller problems, nobody has cracked the code to make it work at scale yet.
So it seems like we're still a ways off from seeing analog AI rivaling large language models. But here's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Hinton pushes back against this idea that large language models are just glorified autocomplete.
Oh, really?
He argues that true autocomplete actually requires genuine understanding.
Okay.
And to illustrate this, he uses this clever puzzle example.
Okay, I like puzzles.
Imagine a room
All right.
where the walls are painted white, blue, or yellow.
All right, I'm picturing it.
But the yellow paint fades to white over time.
Okay.
The question is, what needs to be done to make all the walls white in 2 years?
Oh, that's a good one.
It sounds simple,
Mm-hmm.
but it requires understanding not just the words,
Right.
but the concepts
Like color.
of color,
Yeah.
time, and cause and effect.
Right.
Even symbolic AI experts who often criticize LLMs were surprised by the model's ability to solve this.
Oh, wow.
So it suggests that there's more going on in these models
Okay.
than just statistical pattern matching.
Right.
They seem to be developing some form of understanding, even if it's not exactly the same as human understanding.
Okay.
And speaking of human understanding,
Yeah.
Hinton draws this fascinating parallel between human memory and the hallucinations
Okay.
that LLMs sometimes produce.
Right, like when they make things up.
He uses the example of John Dean's Watergate testimony.
Okay.
Researchers compared Dean's very detailed account of
Yeah.
Oval Office meetings with the actual recordings.
Hmm.
And it turns out his memory was riddled with errors.
What?
He fabricated entire meetings,
The way.
misremembered quotes,
Wow.
the whole 9 yards.
That's crazy.
But here's the thing. He wasn't intentionally lying.
Oh, so he really believed it.
Hinton points out that just like LLMs,
Mm-hmm.
humans tend to confabulate memories.
Oh, that's interesting.
We fill in gaps with details that fit the narrative, even if they aren't accurate.
Right.
Our memory is less about perfect recall
Yeah.
and more about constructing a believable story.
Okay.
So it's like our brains are running their own internal autocomplete. Yeah.
Generating memories based on what we think should have happened rather than what actually happened.
Hmm.
And it raises this fundamental question. If both humans and LLMs can make things up,
Right.
are they really so different after all?
That's a mind-bending thought.
It gets to the core of what it means to understand something.
Yeah, like what does it even mean to understand something if we're all just making things up?
I know.
Now, to understand where these large language models came from,
Right.
Hinton takes us back to his own groundbreaking research.
Okay.
In 1985,
Wow.
on feature vectors for word meanings.
So this is where we get a glimpse into the roots of modern AI.
Right.
Back then, there were two main theories of meaning.
Okay.
One from psychology, focusing on features like a cat being furry, four-legged, and meowing.
Okay.
The other from AI,
Yeah.
emphasized structure,
Right.
like defining a cat based on its relationships to other concepts like animal or having a tail, right? Like a hierarchy or categories or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Hinton brilliantly showed that these two seemingly opposing theories
Right.
could be reconciled
Okay.
using a generative approach to relational graphs.
Interesting.
Instead of storing static knowledge structures,
Right.
he used symbol sequences to train a neural network to learn feature vectors for words
Yeah.
and the relationships between them.
Okay.
So he found a way to teach a computer to understand the meaning of words by learning how they relate to each other in a sentence.
Okay, so like the context.
And this idea is still at the heart of how large language models work today,
Wow.
even with all the fancy new techniques.
So that's pretty fundamental then.
It's amazing how Hinton's early work continues to shape the field even decades later.
That's pretty incredible.
But now, as these models become increasingly powerful, he's sounding the alarm about the potential dangers of superintelligence.
Right.
He's worried about AI manipulating humans and
Yeah.
gaining control, even comparing it to politicians who get obsessed with power once they realize how it helps them achieve their goals.
Yeah, like it's a tool.
He tells a story about a conversation he had with a European Union official
Oh, wow.
about AI regulation.
Okay.
And the official wasn't surprised at all by Hinton's concerns.
Really?
They simply said, well, we've made such a mess of things, why wouldn't they?
Oh, my goodness.
It's sobering to think that even those in power are grappling with the potential consequences of increasingly intelligent machines.
That's scary.
It's like we're at a crossroads.
Right.
We have to decide what kind of future
Yeah.
we want to build with AI. Will it work with us
Right.
or against us?
And this leads to another chilling thought from Hinton.
Okay.
This idea of AI competing with each other for resources, much like species compete in the natural world.
Right, survival of the fittest.
Right.
Like Darwinism.
Yeah. He points out that as AI gets more sophisticated, it needs more and more computing power,
Yeah.
data, and energy.
To keep learning and evolving.
Right.
And what's to stop these superintelligent systems from fighting amongst themselves for those limited resources?
That's a scary thought.
It sounds like science fiction,
It does.
but it highlights the potential for unintended consequences as we push the limits of AI development.
Yeah. We really need to think about where this is all going.
This is heavy stuff.
It is.
And then Hinton throws another curveball.
Okay.
one that challenges how we think about consciousness.
Right.
He argues that even chatbots could have subjective experience.
Oh, really?
This is perhaps the most philosophically provocative part of the talk.
Okay.
It hinges on Hinton's critique of the inner theater model of the mind.
Right.
This idea that we have this private mental space where we experience the world.
Like a little stage in our head.
Right, like a little stage in our heads.
Yeah.
But Hinton argues that this metaphor is flawed.
Oh,
To understand why, we need to look at how we actually use language
yeah.
to talk about mental states.
Okay.
He gives this example of a multimodal chatbot
Oh,
with a robotic arm and a camera.
right.
Imagine putting a prism in front of its lens,
Mm.
distorting its perception.
Right.
If the chatbot could understand and articulate this distortion,
Yeah.
saying something like, I see the object in front of me, but I had the subjective experience that it was over there,
Right.
wouldn't that suggest some kind of subjective awareness?
Huh. That's interesting.
It's a brilliant thought experiment
It is.
that forces us to rethink what we mean by subjective experience.
Yeah.
Is it about having this private internal world?
Mm.
Or is it more about being able to understand and communicate
Right.
how we perceive the world,
Yeah.
even when our perception is messed up?
That's a good point.
Hinton seems to be suggesting that subjective experience might be more widespread than we think.
Okay.
And it might not be limited to humans.
Mind blown.
I need a minute to process all this.
Me too.
Okay, so we've covered like a lot of ground, you know?
Yeah.
From shifting perceptions of AI
Right.
to the potential of analog neural networks.
Yeah.
We even touched on like the nature of consciousness.
Right.
Now, you might think that with all these concerns about AI's power, Hinton would be advocating for like hitting the brakes on AI development.
Right.
But surprisingly, he doesn't.
Really?
He actually argues that slowing down development just isn't feasible.
Huh.
There's too much economic incentive to
Yeah.
push forward,
Right.
and attempts to slow things down would likely fail.
Interesting.
He even uses OpenAI as an example.
Oh, yeah.
They started with the mission focused on developing AI safely and responsibly. But ultimately,
Yeah.
they couldn't resist the market pressures
Right.
and ended up prioritizing profit over caution.
That's a cautionary tale.
It is.
So if slowing down isn't the answer,
All right.
what does Hinton suggest we do?
He believes we need to focus on making AI benevolent.
In other words, aligning its goals with our own.
Right.
That sounds simple enough in theory,
Yes.
but in practice,
It's incredibly complex.
it's incredibly complex.
Yeah.
It's not like humanity has this single unified set of goals.
Right. We have all sorts of like conflicting
Yeah,
desires and values.
exactly. So how do we design an AI that aligns with all of humanity?
Yeah.
Or even like a significant portion of it?
Right.
That's the million-dollar question.
That is the question.
It's a question that goes way beyond just technical solutions.
Right.
It's about philosophy,
Yeah.
ethics, and understanding what it means to be human.
Totally.
And Hinton raises another crucial point,
Okay.
the danger of open sourcing large language models.
Oh, right.
He uses this striking analogy,
I remember this.
comparing it to buying nuclear weapons at Radio Shack.
Yeah.
Okay, that definitely got my attention.
Yeah, that's a good one.
What's so bad about making these models publicly available?
Right.
Wouldn't that help accelerate progress? Well, it could,
Yeah.
but it also significantly increases the risk of misuse.
Okay.
If anyone with a laptop and an internet connection
Right.
can access and modify these powerful tools,
Mhm.
it's not hard to imagine them falling into the wrong hands.
Right. We're talking deep fakes,
Yeah.
manipulating elections,
Mm-hmm.
even developing autonomous weapons
Right.
that could operate without human oversight.
Like scary stuff.
Exactly. The potential for harm is huge.
Yeah.
Hinton believes that, for now, keeping these models under tight control is absolutely crucial.
Okay, so instead of a free-for-all,
Right.
where everyone's racing to build the most powerful AI,
Yeah.
he's advocating for a more collaborative approach.
Precisely, a collaborative ecosystem where researchers and developers work together to make sure AI is developed and deployed responsibly.
Right.
We're talking open dialogue,
Yes.
transparency, and shared responsibility.
Mhm.
And that involves not just scientists and engineers,
Right.
but also ethicists,
Yeah.
policymakers,
Mhm.
and the public.
Right, this is a big conversation that needs to happen.
It is. We need to figure out what kind of future we want to create with AI
Yeah,
and put safeguards in place to ensure it benefits everyone.
absolutely.
Mm.
And while Hinton acknowledges the very real concerns about AI's potential downsides,
Right.
He also seems genuinely optimistic about its potential
Yeah.
to make the world a better place.
It's like he's saying, hey, this is a powerful tool and we need to be careful, but let's not let fear paralyze us.
Right.
We can use our ingenuity to steer AI in a positive direction.
Yeah. And speaking of ingenuity, one thing that struck me about his talk was his emphasis on curiosity-driven research.
Oh, yeah.
He talked about how scientists are driven by this fundamental desire to understand how things work,
Right.
regardless of like the immediate practical applications.
Like a pure love of knowledge,
Yeah.
understanding for its own sake.
Right. He argued that while both types of research are important,
Yeah.
science for knowledge and science for applications, we shouldn't lose sight of the value of pure scientific curiosity.
It's what drives us to explore the unknown,
Right.
to ask those fundamental questions,
Yeah.
and to push the boundaries of human understanding.
Totally. And who knows, maybe it's that same curiosity that will ultimately help us navigate the complex and uncertain future of AI.
It's a hopeful thought and one that resonates deeply with Hinton's own life and career.
Yeah.
He's dedicated his life to pursuing knowledge,
Right.
uncovering the mysteries of the human mind,
Yeah.
and pushing the boundaries of what's possible with AI.
Mhm.
And even though he's now raising some serious red flags about the potential risks
Yeah.
of AI,
Right.
he hasn't given up on the dream of creating a better future with it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He even ends his talk on a lighter note, talking about how he invested in NVIDIA,
Oh, yeah.
the company that makes those powerful AI chips.
I remember that he joked about buying a bunch of NVIDIA shares for his daughter's 30th birthday
Yeah.
and how they've skyrocketed in value since then.
Oh, wow.
He actually framed it in terms of evolutionary biology,
Right.
saying that one of our primary goals as humans is to ensure the well-being of our offspring.
Yeah. So even when talking about AI and its potential motivations, he brings it back to this fundamental human drive.
It was a clever way to tie everything together. And it was also a good reminder that even in the face of these big existential questions,
Right.
there's still room for humor
Yeah.
and a bit of self-deprecation.
Which is something Hinton definitely doesn't lack.
Exactly. And that's part of what makes him such a compelling figure.
Yeah.
He's brilliant, insightful,
Yeah.
and deeply concerned about the future of humanity.
Right.
But he's also approachable
Yeah.
and relatable.
Totally.
And he's able to find humor even when talking about serious stuff.
It's a rare combination.
It is, and
Yeah.
it's what makes his talk so thought-provoking and engaging.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Hinton's mind,
Okay.
what are some key takeaways you'd like to highlight for our listeners?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that AI is no longer something out of science fiction. It's evolving rapidly, and it's going to have a massive impact on our lives.
Absolutely.
And Hinton's talk helps us like cut through the hype and speculation surrounding AI
Right.
and offers a grounded, nuanced perspective from someone who's been at the forefront of the field for decades.
He's not just blindly cheering for AI,
Right.
and he's not predicting the apocalypse.
Yeah.
He's a realist acknowledging both the incredible potential
Yeah.
and the very real risks of this technology.
Another key takeaway is that the line between human and artificial intelligence
Yeah.
is becoming increasingly blurry.
Hinton's own research on feature vectors
Right.
and his insights into the nature of subjective experience really challenge our assumptions about what it means to think, understand, and be conscious.
It forces us to grapple with the possibility that consciousness might not be limited to biological brains,
Right.
and that we might need to expand our definition of intelligence
Yeah.
to include the capabilities that AI systems are already demonstrating.
And finally, I think Hinton's talk leaves us with a sense of both urgency and hope.
Yeah.
Urgency because the decisions we make about AI today will have long-lasting consequences.
Right.
And hope because we have the capacity for ingenuity,
Yeah.
collaboration, and a deep desire to understand and shape the world around us.
It's a reminder that the future isn't set in stone.
Right.
We have a say in how this all unfolds, and it's up to all of us to engage in this conversation and make sure our voices are heard.
Yeah, it's like we're holding this incredibly powerful tool, but we're still figuring out the instruction manual.
Right.
And the stakes are incredibly high.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to this idea of aligning AI's goals with our own.
Right.
It's a concept that sounds straightforward, but it gets so complex when you start digging deeper.
Because it's easy to talk about AI alignment as if humanity is this like big happy family with shared goals.
Right.
But we're not.
We're not.
We're diverse. We disagree.
Yeah.
We have different values, and sometimes those values are in direct conflict.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So how do you design an AI system that reflects the values of billions of people,
Yeah.
many of whom don't even agree on what those values should be?
Right.
That's the real challenge. And it's not just a technical challenge, it's a philosophical one, a social one,
Yeah.
even a political one.
And when you layer on the speed at which this technology is developing,
Yeah.
the urgency really hits home.
Yeah, the genie's out of the bottle.
Right.
So the question isn't if we'll have powerful AI, but how we'll manage it.
Right. How do we make sure this powerful tool benefits everyone?
That's the question.
Hinton seems to be suggesting that this collaborative approach, these collaborative intelligence ecosystems, are a key part of the solution.
Yeah,
It's about finding ways for humans and AI to work together, each playing to their strengths.
exactly. It's not about humans versus machines.
Hmm.
It's about finding the right balance, the right partnership, where AI can help us overcome our limitations
Yeah.
and solve problems that we couldn't solve on our own.
Think about something like climate change. We need to analyze massive amounts of data, model incredibly complex systems, and coordinate efforts on a global scale.
Yeah, that's where AI could be so powerful.
But we also need human judgment, our ethical considerations,
Right.
our social intelligence to make sure the solutions we develop are not just effective,
Right.
but also just unsustainable.
Precisely. It's about finding that sweet spot where human ingenuity and AI's computational power can work together
Yeah.
to tackle these big, hairy problems.
Okay, but let's go back to this idea of open sourcing large language models.
Yeah.
Because it seems like Hinton is pretty concerned about the potential downsides there.
He is, and for good reason.
Right.
Remember that analogy he used comparing it to buying nuclear weapons at Radio Shack?
It's a stark reminder of how dangerous these powerful tools could be if they fall into the wrong hands.
Right, because right now we don't really have a global rule book
Right.
for how to develop and deploy these technologies responsibly.
Exactly. While open access to these models could definitely speed up innovation, it also raises serious questions about misuse. Imagine a world where anyone with a laptop and internet access could create incredibly convincing deepfakes,
Right.
manipulate public opinion,
Right.
or even develop autonomous weapons systems.
The potential consequences are pretty terrifying, to be honest.
So what's the alternative?
Yeah.
How do we balance the need for progress with the need for safety and responsibility?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think Hinton is urging us to be incredibly cautious here.
Yeah.
He seems to be advocating for more control, more oversight, at least until we have a better understanding of how to manage these risks.
So more collaboration, more dialogue,
Yes.
more careful thought about the ethical implications before we just fling open the doors and let everyone have access to these incredibly powerful tools.
Yes, absolutely. It's about taking a more measured approach.
Right.
And this isn't just a conversation for scientists and engineers.
Yeah.
It needs to include ethicists, policymakers, and the public.
Right. This is a conversation for all of us.
Yeah, we all have a stake in shaping the future of AI.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Geoff Hinton's mind,
Okay.
what are the big takeaways you hope our listeners walk away with?
I think the biggest takeaway is this. AI is no longer a futuristic fantasy. It's here. And it's going to change the world in profound ways.
Yeah.
Hinton's talk gives us a glimpse into the mind of one of the pioneers of this field, someone who understands both the immense possibilities and the very real dangers of this technology.
Right.
And he's urging us to be thoughtful, to be cautious, and to work together to make sure AI benefits all of humanity.
It's a call to action, to think deeply about these issues, to engage in these crucial conversations, and to make sure our voices are heard as we navigate this uncharted territory.
And to remember that the future of AI isn't predetermined.
Yeah.
We have a say in how this story unfolds.
That's a great point. I think that's a perfect place to wrap up this
Yeah.
deep dive into Geoff Hinton's mind.
It's been a fascinating conversation.
It has
A lot to think about.
a lot to think about and a lot to discuss.
Absolutely.
So to our listeners, thanks for joining us on this journey.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.
We hope you found it as thought-provoking as we did.
And be sure to check out the show notes for links to Hinton's talk and other resources.
Yeah, and let us know what you think.
Yeah. What stood out to you?
What are your hopes and fears about AI?
What questions do you have?
Join the conversation.
Yeah. Let's figure this out together.
Until next time.
Bye.